Hi, Paul Thompson here. Next step on the journey of making this album. And the thing that I'm going to talk about today is kind of the first part of the process. It's the ideas part. It's getting these fragments that I think of them as, and getting them in some kind of form that you can start to develop and kind of collate all your ideas together and see which ones are worth developing, which ones are a bit of a dead end. I'll probably have a folder full of different things, and they might be in different forms. There's a couple of different ways that I find these ideas. Sometimes I'll just sit and improvise at the piano, but there's a downside to that because you'll often go to the same kind of shapes that you usually go for. And so you're kind of restricted by your own facility at the instrument. So you can do one of two things. You can either pick up an instrument that you're not familiar with and start trying to work out ideas on, a guitar or a mandolin or whatever, because you won't know the familiar shapes if you're not a really natural instrumentalist on that instrument. And that can be an interesting way of finding things that you wouldn't necessarily have found otherwise. The really important thing, if you're doing that, is to either be near Logic or your DAW of choice, so that you can quickly stick it in record if you're improvising on a synth or on a virtual instrument. You can quickly grab the idea down and follow it while it's still kind of fresh and you're in that flow state. Or voice recorder, phone. In fact, I often get ideas when I'm sitting at the piano just messing around and not really doing anything. And so I use my voice, I use my phone to video myself playing the idea. So here's one. So you get the idea. I've found an interesting kind of pattern that moves around, and it just sounded cool. So I'm grabbing it, and it's a fragment and it exists. So my phone is full of stuff like that. The other way of doing it is writing stuff down. Now, this doesn't have to be if you are, writing on score paper, although I would encourage anybody to develop that skill. It's actually not that difficult to pick up. It gives you the common reference that Western classical music has used for many years. That's still quite useful for just capturing some basic ideas. Obviously not going to work for every style of music, but it's quite useful to have some of this. I've got just pages and pages of this stuff. And for example, I think there's probably in here so one of the pieces on the album, which is called Melancholy, started in here, exactly here actually. And so I started writing down an idea. At some point, I'm scribbling things out. At some point, as it got more harmonically complex, I would have gone to the piano to just double check what I was hearing. But then I'm inserting in bits here. You can see I'm kind of running out of space down here. So I end up lots of arrows going round and round and round. And then with that one in particular, I think I did end up putting it in staff pad, partly just so I could hear it playing out reasonably nicely, and partly so I could have an easy way of printing out the parts for the musicians. A bit more fun than doing it in Sibelius. But the alternative way of doing it, if I can find something that I started sketching out in here. Here we go. Is not actually writing any music down at all. It's just putting boxes with ideas of what's happening in the piece. Kind of mapping out the piece without writing any of the music, any of the kind of melodic stuff. And I know that Eric Whittaker does that a lot. He will plan out a piece in a kind of graphical form. It gives you a really interesting way of, I don't know if architecting is a word, maybe it is, architecting the piece of music before you've actually had to fill in the notes. Because when you start filling in the notes, sometimes you veer a bit off course. So it's just a different way of approaching it. The other way of doing it, if you don't write music, sometimes I'll write stuff down, and if I'm like just find a shape and I want to write it down quickly, I'll just write the notes down that I'm playing. Left hand, da da da, right hand, da da da. Or I might write a series of chord symbols. The main thing is just having a way and finding different ways that you can capture something as quickly as possible, because you've got to chase the idea when you're in the flow mode, because it will run out at some point. And when it runs out, it's cool. Just stop there, make sure that you understand what you've written down, so you can come back to it, and then just put it to one side. And that, again, is the kind of beauty of not being on a horrific deadline and just going, well, I've just got to run with the idea that I've got and hope for the best because I don't have time to do anything else. With this kind of project, you've got all the time you need, and it's finished when you say it's finished. So, you know, I'll gather these ideas together, and I might have, I don't know, 30 ideas before, or even 40 or 50 ideas before I start to hone things down and go, okay, I really like the way that that's going. I'm going to try and develop that. So this is moving from the point of fragments to expanding that material out. And there's a couple of different ways of doing that. But one of the really important things, and we'll talk about this when we get to mixing as well, but one of the really important things is to take the idea in its current state out of context, and you'll get fresh material will just appear in your head. Just play a mix of where you got up to, and ideas will just suggest themselves. Because what's happening, I don't know anything about this because I don't understand the workings of the brain, but what I think is happening is your brain is looking for interesting patterns in the thing that you've created and filling in bits and going, oh yeah, it should do that. Or you know, it might be that it's just that an entirely new section will just suddenly pop into your head. So, you know, find some way of then capturing that. And then when you're back in the studio, you can go back to it. Now, I've showed you my video thing, but the other thing that I do is I've got my voice recorder on that pull down, super quick, easy, one click, get to the voice recorder. And the voice recorder I find incredibly useful. And actually, I've done this for many, many years. So back in the 90s, I have a little portable mini cassette, like an old dictation machine type thing. And I used to carry that with me everywhere. Because I would get ideas and I'd just sing them into the dictation thing. So this is the kind of, you know, this is the modern 21st century version of that. But I'm going to show you an example of a piece that started like this. And it's the one that I mentioned last time. It was the piece that literally just popped into my head. The melody popped into my head while I was sat in the car park. I didn't have anything to write with, so I just sang it.
Sorry about this.
That's really weird. Why am I apologising to myself? Anyway, here we go.
Da 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 da. Jesus. Da 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 da.
Okay, kind of veers off a bit there. But I've got two things from that. I've got a tune that an inkling of what of the kind of chord, the suspension idea is going to happen, and then I want it to go up, and I want it to kind of restate. And the way that I was thinking about this was it's like an introduction, like a welcome. I always thought this was going to be the thing that was the start of the record. And I wanted it to almost sound almost like a kind of old folk melody that is just something that you've always known. Anyway, so I had that, and I don't think so. That was on the 27th of February, and then this was on the 8th of March. So I've gone through, that's a good kind of week and a half or something later, when I've actually sat down to work it out. And I sat down, I worked it out a bit. And I thought, right, I'm just going to play it free and set Logic going, play it a few times. One of those captures will be the one. And this is what I ended up with. So this is just the piano. Okay, so you get the idea. That's where I've kind of taken that. That's a good example of taking that little fragment, which is just the melody and a kind of idea of what the chords might be, and then turned it into something which has actually got, some interesting suspensions in. I really kind of honed down the chord sequence, and the way that I went about that was just I tried it with different chords underneath, and when I hit the one that felt like it was the solid, the kind of block of granite that had always been there. It's so hard to describe this stuff. I knew that this was going to be the hardest video, because trying to describe where ideas come from and how you capture ideas is incredibly difficult. In some ways, the rest of the process is kind of straightforward, because there are tried and tested ways of doing all that stuff. This is the tricky bit. All I can say is that there are different states that you get in. When the idea is coming to you, that's the kind of flow state. So even if you're sat in the car singing it into your phone and hoping for the best, that you'll remember the vibe when you get back, or if you're at the piano and an idea suddenly comes to you, or playing your guitar and you quickly stick a track in record and go for it, you keep going until you run out, because that's super valuable, that bit. When that's the kind of almost like the divine connection. I don't know what you're connected to, whatever your belief system is, you're connected to the kind of single power of the universe, and it's channeling through you. And I don't know where it comes from, and then you have something. And so keep going when you're in that state. When the thing is running through you, keep going, keep going, keep going. It will stop. It will just shut off at some point, and you'll be like, "Oh, I've got nothing," But at that point, what you have is you've got the gold dust. You've got the thing, the magic, that thing you've kind of bottled and captured, and now, you've got something to go for. You've got something to develop. It's almost like getting past the blank page syndrome. Once you've got something to work on, it's a hell of a lot easier. So that became, so then, then further on to that, I kind of did synth design around the sound design, really around the opening of that. As it goes up, you get the strings coming in, and it becomes, you get that kind of feeling, that kind of rush that you get when you feel something kind of take off. Structure wise, it's just like an A structure, the simplest, because I wanted it to have that slight kind of feeling of repetition and solidness. And it's really a welcome to the record. So it's not, I didn't want it to go off developing into lots of different areas. I wanted it to be a kind of open the doors, welcome you in, and get you ready for, the journey that you're going to go on through the record. That kind of thing. Again, we're going to talk about track sequencing, which is kind of a weird art in itself, of working out what order once you've kind of settled on, these are my 12 tracks or 10 tracks or whatever, what order do you put them in? And that is quite a long-winded process, because you put them in the order and then you have to sit and listen to it. And at some point, you'll get to a point where you'll be like, oh, that doesn't work. Everything worked up to that point. And you have to go back and you have to think about it. And there's all kinds of things to consider, like, what key does one piece end in? What key does the next piece start in? How does the pacing work? You don't want it too jarring. You want to kind of feel like, not that you can't go from a slow track to a fast track, but you want the overall feel to be one of continuous movement, as opposed to disparate, stuff. And I know in an age of streaming, you would be forgiven for saying, but Paul, all this stuff is completely irrelevant, because people shuffle, you've got one track on a playlist, or, but look, you're creating this for you. Yeah. I created this album for me primarily. I didn't really, obviously you want people to like it. You want people to go, oh, wow, that really touched me. That moved me, that piece of music. That's an amazing reward when somebody says that to you. But ultimately, you've got to be happy with it. So it's got to be your thing that you wrote for you, that you built for you. And so that's why I still focused on this idea that you can make an album. And it's a collection of work. It's almost like an exhibition in a gallery. You know, there is an overall theme, an overarching idea behind the thing. But you take people in, people walk in, and then you've decided what order the pictures go. And you take people on a journey and you make them feel something. And then when they get to the end, it's been an experience. That's the idea anyway. This stage, it's almost like when you have tech companies that do those kind of hack days, that do the kind of hackathon. I'm sure it's not called that. I can't remember what it's called. You can remind me in the comments. And everybody is kind of just smashing through and getting a load of stuff down, and then you sift through it afterwards. That's what I think of this kind of exploratory stage of getting the fragments together. And it's useful to think of them as fragments because it doesn't overwhelm you with the magnitude of what you've got ahead of you to do. This is just your exploration. This is the fun bit, the science experiment where you're just messing around, finding bits and pieces, ideas. There might be a load of stuff that you've written down on different pages, recorded on different voice notes. And then as you start to listen to your stuff and you kind of go, okay, what have I got? You go, oh, hang on, this bit goes with that bit. Let me try joining those together. This is how bands have written music for all time. You know, one person comes in with, yeah, I've got this riff. And then somebody else comes in with like, I've got this melody idea, or I've got this bass line. And everything gets kind of glued together and you work it out like a big jigsaw puzzle. That's all for today. So next time we're going to look at what you do from the point at which you're pretty sure you've got your fragments together. You've written it down, maybe you sketched it into your sequencer, but you kind of know what the material is now. You've got your track written, your song written. And so now you want to start making it into a proper track. That's a really interesting part of the process as well, because there's lots of really cool creative choices to be made at that point. So thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me on this little adventure. I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye-bye.